Welcome to the deep dive. You brought us to a truly fascinating place today. Tell Bet Shemesh. Your sources paint a picture of a site practically, well, vibrating with biblical history and archaeological mystery.
It certainly does. Tel Bet Shemesh occupies a geographically significant location, as your notes pointed out. It's situated near what is now an industrial area, not far from the area known as the Mountain of Good, Harduf.
And just a stone's throw away, there's that pregnant story of Hartuv, that former Jewish farming village with Bulgarian roots. It's
Yeah.
quite remarkable how the Yemenite neighborhood of Nahala, affectionately called Naha, later grew on that very same land. It really underscores the many layers of history, you find in this region.
Indeed. And the name Beit Shemesh itself, House of the Sun, it carries a powerful resonance with the biblical narratives we're about to explore together.
Exactly. So our mission in this deep dive is to really unpack the historical and archaeological significance of Tel Bet Shemesh, using these sources you provided to connect it to some of the most pivotal stories in the Bible. Okay, let's dive right in, starting with a figure I'm sure you're familiar with, Samson.
Ah, Sampson, yes. The dramatic saga unfolds in the Book of Judges, and the geographical context your source provides is incredibly illuminating. It mentions his activities starting in Ben Matana Dan, which translates to the encampment of Dan. That term encampment, well, it's just a period where the tribe of Dan hadn't yet established permanent
An
settlements.
encampment. So rather than a firmly rooted presence, they were perhaps still more mobile in this area. What insight does that give us right off the bat?
Well, a key insight your source offers is how this less settled period hints at the tribe of Dan's struggles to fully control this border region. The text further specifies his movements between Zorah and Eshtel. Now, as the presenter in your source notes, pinpointing their exact modern locations is challenging, but the tells. Tel Zorah and Tel Eshtal, these ancient settlement mounds built up over centuries, they're strong possibilities.
So even the landscape itself holds clues. And it really paints a picture of this frontier, doesn't it? We have the Israelite presence, implied to be in the hill country, and then the Philistine strongholds down in the more fertile riverbeds like Timnah, which the renowned archaeologist Ami Mazar excavated at Tel Batashi.
Mm-hmm. And what's fascinating here is an observation made about vegetation on these ancient tells. The lack of deep topsoil over the accumulated ruins often means less lush plant growth compared to the surrounding hills. It's a subtle visual cue on the landscape that can actually help identify ancient settlement sites.
That's such a clever detail. It really makes you reconsider Samson's story. Here's this figure, often celebrated as a purely Israelite hero, yet he's operating smack dab in a region with a strong Philistine influence.
That's a crucial point. The archaeological evidence of a vibrant Philistine culture in the vicinity of his activities adds layers of complexity to Samson's identity and actions. Your source even raises the question of whether he fits the traditional mold of a purely biblical hero.
Right. When you consider his relationships with Philistine women, his frequent trips into Philistine territory, it definitely challenges that simple heroic image. And the presenter offers this compelling interpretation that Samson might actually embody the tribe of Dan's failure to truly dominate this area.
It's an intriguing perspective, definitely. If the tribe of Dan couldn't firmly establish themselves, they would naturally be more vulnerable to Philistine cultural influence. In this view, Samson becomes less of a straightforward conquering hero and more of a figure shaped by this Philistine environment, almost a product of cultural friction.
Almost a Philistine hero, in a way, highlighting the tribe of Dan's weaknesses. But the Book of Judges still emphasizes God's eventual intervention and salvation, even working through this, flawed individual. It's a really nuanced portrayal.
Precisely. And the biblical text itself notes that Samson went down, both geographically towards Philistine territory and perhaps, spiritually. It suggests a trajectory away from his Israelite roots and towards these Philistine entanglements.
Okay, so having explored the early biblical accounts linked to this region with Samson, let's now turn to another pivotal story, where Tel Bet Shemesh plays a central role. The return of the Ark of the Covenant in the early chapters of Samuel.
Indeed. The backdrop here is the Philistines' decisive victory over the Israelites near Shiloh at a place called Ebenezer, where they managed to capture the Ark. This was a devastating loss for the Israelites, and the Philistines took the Ark in triumph to their major cities like Gaza and Ashdod.
But their victory was short-lived, wasn't it? They soon started experiencing all sorts of troubles while they had the Ark. The biblical text mentions afflictions, often interpreted as hemorrhoids, though there could be other ways to understand those ailments. Regardless, it wasn't going well for them.
Right, regardless of the exact nature of the problems, it became clear to the Philistines that holding on to the ark was causing them significant distress. So they made the decision to return it to the Israelites, and their choice of destination was Bet Shemesh.
Which makes perfect sense geographically, right? It was a natural point of contact, a border region situated between the Philistine territory in the lowlands and the Israelite settlements up in the hills.
Precisely. And the manner of the ark's return is quite interesting. The Philistines placed it on a new cart pulled by two milk cows that had never been yoked, letting them wander according to their own instinct. Your source highlights a fascinating parallel here. This method aligns with Philistine depictions found on ancient Egyptian artifacts.
That's an incredible connection. Really shows how intertwined these cultures were, even in conflict. And the route the ark took, according to the biblical account, is described as a direct path. It's almost uncanny how it aligns with the route of a modern train line built way back in 1892, which, although sadly not operating today, still exists. The enduring geography shaping events millennia apart, it's mind-blowing.
It truly underscores the persistent features of the landscape. So the ark made its way directly to Bet Shemesh, arriving at a very specific time during the wheat harvest in the field belonging to a man named Joshua. Can you imagine witnessing that scene?
Oh, wow. The people of Bet Shemesh must have been absolutely ecstatic to see the ark return after such a profound loss.
Yeah,
The source mentions their great rejoicing upon its arrival.
absolutely. However, Bet Shemesh wasn't the ark's final resting place. After this initial return, it was moved further inland to the territory of Benjamin, and eventually it found its permanent home in Jerusalem under David and Solomon. But Bet Shemesh served as that crucial first stop on its journey back to the heart of Israelite territory.
So, the biblical narratives undeniably place Bet Shemesh at the center of some truly pivotal moments. Now let's shift our focus to what archaeology has unearthed. It sounds like the earliest excavations weren't exactly meticulous.
Unfortunately, that's a common story in early archaeology, late 19th, early 20th century. The source mentions that the early digs at Tel Bet Shemesh were rather destructive, especially impacting the remains of a Byzantine monastery built on the Tel. A significant amount of material was, regrettably, lost.
That's a real shame. But thankfully, more recent and careful excavations took place, right? Starting in the 80s and 90s by Bar-Ilan University, with Barney Morovich and Letterman focusing on undisturbed areas.
Yes, these later excavations were highly fruitful. They found significant parts of a neighborhood, fortifications, allowed archaeologists to establish a clearer chronology, Canaanite origins, then Israelite Iron Age to First and Two, plus Middle and Late Bronze layers underneath.
And this is where Israel Finkelstein's work comes in, even though his big dig was at Izbet Sarta, near Rosh Hayan. His methodology there had big implications for Bet Shemesh, too.
Exactly. Finkelstein's work at Izbit Sarta, seen as a potential early Israelite site near the Philistine Tel Qasil, pioneered the systematic collection and analysis of animal bones as an ethnic marker.
The pig bone analysis. Famous stuff. He found almost zero pig bones at Izbit Sarta, but at Tel Qasil, it was like 20–30%. The idea being Israelites avoided pork. It's almost like a quick takeaway. Pig bones, or lack thereof, become this potent cultural indicator.
That's the core argument. Dietary practices like pork consumption often differed between groups. Since Israelites generally avoided pork for religious reasons, their sites should reflect that. And when applied to Tel Batashi, biblical Timnah, they consistently found high percentages of pig bones in all layers, strongly supporting its Philistine identity.
Which then ties beautifully into the pottery. At Tel Batashi, you get Philistine pottery with those Mycenaean influences, alongside Canaanite styles suggesting maybe continued Canaanite presence or trade. What about Bet Shemesh then? Pottery and pigs.
At Tel Bet Shemesh, they did find some traded Philistine pottery showing contact, but it wasn't the main type. Crucially, pig bone remains virtually disappear in the Iron Age third and two layers.
Ah, so the lack of pig bones in those later layers perfectly aligns with it becoming an Israelite city then.
Yeah.
It's truly remarkable how these small details, like animal bones, offer such profound insights.
It is, and beyond that, excavations at Tel Bet Shemesh revealed other things too. Your source mentions an early olive oil production based in agriculture and possibly some cultic Canaanite objects, glimpses into earlier religious practices before the Israelite phase.
And there was that intriguing inscription too, right, with the name Hanan linked to names in King Solomon's leadership list. That suggests maybe some continuity or later Israelite administration.
That's another valuable piece, but perhaps one of the most remarkable finds is that large Iron Age public water system. The source describes it shaped like a cross, not for religious reasons then, but for structural stability. Ingenious.
A massive public works project like that in the Iron Age. It speaks volumes about the organization, the capability of that society. The presenter rightly suggests it implies a strong, central authority, able to plan and execute something so ambitious.
Well, based on initial findings, Morovich and Letterman dated it to the 10th century BCE. That could potentially align with King David's reign, a period of consolidation. However, Finkelstein's revised chronology, which tends to date things a bit later, has sparked ongoing debate.
Ah, the dating debate. So this crucial piece of infrastructure might actually be 9th or even 8th century BCE. I remember the source mentioning the presenter talking to Barney Mordovich about this exact shift. It really highlights how archaeological interpretation evolves, doesn't it?
It certainly does. And it's important to remember, as your source notes, that while the Iron Age is a major focus because of the Bible connection, there are earlier Bronze Age layers too, a much longer history here. And importantly, the Iron Age 2 city also continued using the same large water cistern. It remained vital.
Which just underscores the critical need for water, especially as natural springs nearby likely diminished over time. Those large cisterns became essential for survival.
Exactly. It all paints this vivid picture of a strategically vital place that saw major events across a vast span of history.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Tel Bet Shemesh, we've seen its role in the stories of Samson, the Ark's return, and the archaeology, from pottery shards to pig bones to that amazing water system, gives context and raises, well, intriguing questions about these biblical narratives.
Precisely. The sources you shared really illustrate that interplay between the text and the tangible evidence from the ground. It offers a richer, more nuanced understanding of this ancient site.
It truly makes you think, doesn't it? How archaeology can challenge or corroborate or just add fascinating new layers to traditional interpretations. It really encourages you to ponder that ongoing dialogue between archaeology and biblical studies, and maybe wonder what else is still buried waiting to be found.